وأهلا وسهلا فيكم. نحن راح نكمل المحاضرة باللغة الإنجليزية وفي ترجمة بالعربية، وهلأ أنا راح أحكي بالإنجليزية. Welcome to everyone. This is being simultaneously translated into Arabic. It is being live streamed, and I welcome everybody on this call for a very urgent discussion on genocidal intent and the events ongoing against the Palestinian people in the besieged Gaza Strip. Thank you to the co-hosts of this event, Law for Palestine, El Mizan, Al Haq, and the Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development for organizing this. My name is Noura Erakat. I am a human rights attorney and an associate professor at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, in the departments of Africana Studies and the program of criminal justice, and the author of Justice for Some. Over the last few days, we have witnessed Israel undertaking a crime of genocide against the Palestinian people in the besieged Gaza Strip. Senior Israeli officials have made statements with genocidal intent, from describing Palestinians as human animals, calling to flatten Gaza, to eradicate them, and insisting, as Israeli President Isaac Herzog did, that there are no Palestinian civilians. They then followed these statements with actions that deliberately inflict on the Palestinian people conditions of life calculated to bring about their physical destruction, amounting to the crime of genocide as defined in international law. Genocide was practiced well before it was prescribed in 1949, highlighting what Mahmoud Mamdani calls the politics of naming. What do we as an international society recognize as genocide, and what do we continue to obscure as necessary warfare with tragic consequence? The attacks against Gaza have included the cutting off of water, the cutting off of electricity, the targeting of over a dozen UN schools marked by the unmistakable blue emblem, the targeting of caravans of civilians on designated routes marked for humanitarian movement, the targeting of hospitals with aerial missiles, bombing of the Rafah border crossing now 4 times. It has included the demand for 1.1 million Palestinians, more than half of the Palestinians besieged in Gaza, to evacuate the northern part of the tiny coastal enclave to nowhere. This is not only tantamount to forced population transfer, but it is also reminiscent and tantamount to ethnic cleansing that Palestinians continue to endure. For Palestinians, this is not an isolated situation, but it is an extension of systematic grave injustices the Palestinian people have been subject to for over a century. The UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, Francesca Albanese, has warned that we may be witnessing a repeat of the 1948 Nakba and 1967 Naksa, as Israel continues its genocidal campaign on the Palestinian people. This webinar aims to bring together Palestinian scholars and other legal experts in the crime of genocide to discuss the current situation in Gaza while situating it in the wider settler colonial context in Palestine. The webinar will address the following questions. What is the legal substance of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, also enshrined in the Rome Statute, which birthed the International Criminal Court in Article 6? What is the application of the Genocide Convention and the Rome Statute in the current Israeli assault on Gaza and the wider Palestinian context? And finally, what are the obligations incumbent on third states and the international community at large to protect the Palestinian people against genocide? To have this discussion, we have 4 distinguished speakers. We will begin with Bassel Surani from the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, whose testimony we have recorded and we will hear, to give you a sense of the dire situation in Gaza. organizers of this webinar attempted to invite no less than 7 journalists in Gaza to have this discussion. They lost contact with all 7 journalists. There is fear and uncertainty about whether or not they are actually alive in this moment. This is a real fear. We pray for their protection and for their health. And this is also indicative of the ongoing situation, the gravity of the situation, and what we here are describing in legal language as genocide. Basil's recorded testimony will be followed by Professor Rez Segal, an associate professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Stockton University and the endowed professor in the study of modern genocide. Raz is an Israeli historian who directs the Master of Arts in Holocaust and Genocide Studies program. He has written multiple books about the Holocaust, and he published a piece most recently in the Jurisprudence describing the situation in Gaza as, quote, a textbook case of genocide. Raz will be followed by Arnesa Boljuzmi Kastura, who is a writer and activist originally from Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina. She is a researcher and a survivor of genocide, authors of Letters from Diaspora. She is the founder and former executive director of the Bosniak American Association. Her writing has been featured on media platforms such as The Independent, Huffington Post, Coming of Faith, and many others. Finally, we will hear from Meha Abdallah, an international advocacy officer at the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. She is formerly a senior legal researcher and advocacy officer at Al-Haq, focusing on business and human rights and corporate accountability in occupied territory and conflict-affected settings. Meha holds an LLM in international human rights from the Irish Center for Human Rights. The title of her research is Zionism and Settler Colonialism, an Overlooked Genocide of the Palestinian People. Welcome to our distinguished panelists. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to this audience for its commitment for a better world than the one we live in. With that, I give the floor to the recording of Basil Surani.
Hello, everyone. The situation in Gaza is extremely difficult. 3 days ago, I evacuated to the south of the Gaza Strip to the city of Khan Yunis, along with my family members, as the Israeli army instructed the residents of Gaza City and the northern Gaza to evacuate to the south. I went to PCHR's office over there. Unfortunately, there is no place safe. The bombing is in the south as much as it's in the north. The targeting of civilians and civilian buildings is the same in the north and in the south. It's just a lie. It was heartbreaking to see on my way to Khan Yunis tens of thousands of Palestinians whose houses and dreams got destroyed by the Israeli occupation forces, fleeing for their lives in their cars, in big trucks, and on donkey carts. Some of the people were even evacuating on their, going all this distance on their, walking on their legs. I've seen people, hundreds of people lining up before bakery shops since 6 a.m. waiting to get some bread. There's a crisis in wheat, and there's also crisis in water. Many people have not been showering or drinking water or having access to water due to the decision of the Israel Minister of Defense. They're even eating and drinking as less as they could in order not to go to the toilet and use the toilet because water is very limited. Also with the electricity, there's no electricity. We're completely kind of disconnected from the whole world. We don't get any news. Israel continues to bomb residential buildings, and civilians are in the eye of the storm. No one is safe. Journalists have been targeted and killed. Health staff, health workers, and ambulances have been targeted as well and also killed. UNRWA schools have been targeted while people thought that they are the safest place to be in. We've seen also UNRWA storage stores also being bombed yesterday by the Israeli occupation forces in northern Gaza. This is pure collective punishment. This is a war not launched against Hamas. This is a war that's launched against the Palestinian people. It's true that I evacuated to Khan Yunis 3 days ago, but I decided to come back today because I don't want to see a second Nakba. We want to stay in our homes, resist this unlawful occupation, and not to allow a second Nakba to happen again. It was very heartbreaking to see the tens of thousands fleeing in front of my eyes. And we hope that there is an immediate ceasefire and that humanitarian aid is allowed to go in. I mean, if no humanitarian aid is allowed in, at least for water, we're risking the spread of several diseases among people. The decision by not everyone listened to the decision of the to the Israeli army to evacuate to the south. There are hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are still in Gaza City and northern Gaza, and they refuse to move from their houses, to move from their lands. We risk that, more and more crimes will happen against the Palestinian people. An immediate ceasefire is needed, and we want the international community to immediately intervene to put an end to this. And I don't know what to say, but I hope this nightmare ends. It's also important to stress that due to the high amount of casualties and the security situation on the ground and the continuous Israeli bombardment of all areas across the Gaza Strip, people are not managing to bury their loved ones. And the fridge, like the fridges which they are buried, which they are put in, the bodies are put in, they are completely full, so they are spread on the ground, and they even used ice cream trucks to put the bodies of victims inside them.
I don't think that's going to be easy for any of us to digest. We pray for Basil Surani and his family and all of the people in Gaza, and especially now for the entry of humanitarian aid and the demand for ceasefire. We need so urgently. With that, Raz, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm joining here as a scholar of Holocaust and genocide studies, as a Jewish scholar of Holocaust and genocide studies primarily. And I have a few comments. hope they will make sense and contribute to this discussion. I want perhaps to begin with by saying that as a Holocaust and genocide studies scholar and as a scholar of the Jewish world, the lessons of the Holocaust, if to use this language, were obviously never meant to provide cover for state violence and for genocide. The lessons of the Holocaust were meant to provide protection to groups from state violence and genocide, and especially defenseless groups, especially groups like Palestinians for decades under settler colonial rule, under military occupation, under siege. The lessons of the Holocaust were meant to humanize those facing state violence. And what we're seeing today, I think one of the most, what we just heard now, and the violence and the testimonies that are coming out of Gaza are horrendous. And I think that with that, we're seeing a dehumanization campaign of unprecedented proportions against Palestinians around the world, where Palestinians, I think, certainly Palestinian friends and colleagues who I'm in touch with, feel that their lives do not matter, their deaths have no meaning. They have no attention to their histories, no place for their voices and perspectives. And I think that that's, and again, as I'm not an international legal scholar, but I can say definitely that in the last few years, it's not just now, in the last few years, but now I think we're seeing a shift in the field of Holocaust and genocide studies with regard to the issue of Israeli mass violence against Palestinians, and what we're now seeing, I think, in front of our eyes, witnessing unfolding genocidal violence against the Palestinians in Gaza. I think there's a shift. There are a number of statements in the last couple of days where we've seen a significant number of Holocaust and genocide studies scholars, including Jewish Holocaust and genocide studies scholars, assigning their names on statements talking about unfolding genocide now in Gaza. And I think that this is very significant, because I think that the issue of the dehumanization that we're facing now is based in large part on what we heard a couple of days ago, Israeli former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett in this tantrum in an interview describe what Israel is now doing as, quote, fighting Nazis. So this is why I talk about the shift in Holocaust and genocide studies, because I think that there's a long history to the use of Holocaust memory by Israel to rationalize and to justify and to distort and to deny and to disavow Israeli mass violence against Palestinians. I mean, there's a couple of landmarks on this history. There's the 1982 Israeli Prime Minister Begin describing Arafat in Beirut during Israel's attack on Lebanon as Hitler in his bunker in Berlin. And of course, there's in 2015 Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu engaged in a clear distortion of Holocaust history, saying that the Palestinian Mufti Haji Amin al-Husseini was actually a driving force behind the Hitler's annihilatory war against the Jews, which of course is a complete historical distortion. And now we see this reaching its climax, and we see it's all over Israeli politics and society these days. It's very, very terrible. But this idea that we're fighting Nazis, and if we're fighting Nazis, and everything is permissible, there is no law. and you can do anything that you want and anything that is needed in order to defeat the Nazis. And that's why I think, by the way, that we're seeing such unashamed and explicit genocidal intent. That's the reason. I mean, as I wrote, I think that in the vast majority of cases, perpetrators of genocide don't express themselves in these ways. And the reason that we're now seeing expressions, and we've all, Israel Defense Ministry of Gallant's 9th of October declaration of a complete siege, and I'll come back to this term complete siege in a minute, where it's become now very infamous. But he also said later on, quote, Gaza won't return to what it was before. We will eliminate everything. This is unbelievably direct. And Israeli army spokesperson Daniela Gari, who said particularly the emphasis is on damage and not on accuracy. So the reason that, and there's of course many other examples, the reason is because this idea that we are fighting Nazis. And I think that in that sense, the shift that we're seeing among scholars of Holocaust and genocide studies, and it's a significant shift. You see people who you would not have imagined 10 years ago signing their names to such statements. This shift is significant because academics, and significantly academics in Holocaust and genocide studies, provide legitimacy to the discourse about the Holocaust around the world. There's also a lot of overlap between academics, scholars in Holocaust and genocide studies, and institutes of global Holocaust memory that are state institutes. So there's this dimension as well that is very important. But there's another element here that I think is important to mention in this relation, is that when you think about this is exceptional in the way that the intent, I think, is so straightforward and unashamed, because it's rooted in this discourse about Nazis. And the only other case that comes to my mind where there is such a discourse, of course, is the recent Russian attack against Ukraine, where Ukrainians as well were portrayed by Putin in the Russian media as Nazis, as explicitly Nazis, actually in the frame of what in this sort of Russian imagination is actually a continuation of World War II and the war against the Nazis. It's now very clear that Israel has turned Gaza. The images coming out of Gaza are very, very similar to the images that we saw in Ukrainian cities in the Russian attack on Ukraine. And people, I mean also scholars in the field, your Holocaust and genocide studies scholars, including Jewish Holocaust and genocide studies scholars, and also many, many Jews around the world. I can tell you that I've received many, many emails of support to what I wrote and have said in the last couple of days from Jews, including invoking their parents and grandparents, survivors of the Holocaust, because people are seeing this crude, dehumanizing discourse that turns the people who face mass violence into perpetrators and Nazis, right? And something is breaking in this framework. In this framework, I mean in this framework that's based on Holocaust memory, in which Israel seems like an exceptional state because of its self-proclaimed identity as a Jewish state, which is of course an exclusionary framework to begin with. But this framework based on the Holocaust has provided is a big element. It's definitely discursively, but with political implications of providing Israel impunity, and something is starting to shift and break clearly in this framework, I think, and I think it's significant, and it is tied, I think, also to the Russian war in Ukraine, because that's also a case where discursively we've seen an unprecedented willingness on the part of Western powers and Western commentators and scholars in the field, again, to talk about genocide in Russia's war on Ukraine. And because we have this connection now, this clear connection between what Russia is continuing to do in Ukraine and between Israel's war on Gaza, between these discourses, there is, I think, an opportunity for this sort of shift in the field that, again, we're seeing with more and more people signing their name to the statements. And I think that this is very significant. This is again based, I think, on the dehumanizing discourse that everyone is seeing, because scholars in Holocaust and genocide studies, many of them, definitely me, consider the perspectives of those facing genocide. And this is rooted, of course, in Holocaust scholarship and Jews who study the Holocaust like me, and especially Jews who study the Holocaust like me and center the perspectives of Holocaust victims and Holocaust survivors, right? The situation that we're seeing now unfolding in front of our eyes is unbearable. And business as usual in Holocaust and genocide studies as a field, I think, is not something that's possible anymore. And that, because of the overlap with institutes of Holocaust memory, because of a legitimacy that's these kinds of the field and scholars provide to these institutes, and to the idea of Israel as an exceptional state and the impunity that it has. And that's also in relation to how the Holocaust figures as an issue of politics and identity in the US and Britain and the EU. I think we're seeing a significant change here. And in many ways, I see my role as pushing this change forward, first and foremost, to humanize Palestinians, to center their voices, their perspective, their experiences, their histories, to do everything possible to stop the unfolding genocide in front of our eyes. And I really think that the only, maybe not the only, but the key, I think a key way to stop this is to center the genocide perspectives, now exactly because of everything that I said, but then also to push this shift in Holocaust and genocide studies moving forward. And I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raz, for your emancipatory scholarship, for your morality, and for the light that you're shining on the situation right now, the lessons that we should learn from the past, not only to mourn the past, but also to avoid the repetition, highlighting for us specifically this demonizing through line between Nazi genocide and the present, and really the purpose of decontextualizing this moment. As you said, the emphasis on evil is to decontextualize this moment in order to make that through line without interruption. And so we are all here and have been here to disrupt that and to remind audiences that Palestinians are fighting a freedom struggle and not what we are told in the media. And so the media, the international community that seems enthusiastic, more enthusiastic for these mass atrocities than they have been for a process of decolonization. With that, I want to turn to our guest, Arnessa, an esteemed guest who has survived such atrocities and has dedicated her life to writing and telling about them in order to prevent these atrocities from continuing. Thank you, Arnessa, for being with us.
Thank you, Nora, and thank you for having me on today. First, I just want to express my solidarity with all the Palestinians, both in the diaspora, in Gaza, and in the occupied territories. I'm not a legal scholar. I'm not an attorney, and in terms of my legal expertise, it's quite limited. I am, however, a genocide survivor myself, and I'm somebody who has spent the vast majority of my life talking about not just the Bosnian genocide, but obviously about other genocides and ethnic cleansing campaigns, both past and current. The situation in Gaza is horrifying in every way, and I think for me, those images were horrifically reminiscent of my own experience of living under siege and seeing, your home bombed to pieces. The difficulty I think that many are having is in accepting the word genocide when it comes to what is happening in Gaza right now. So I'm just going to briefly discuss what had happened in Bosnia and why there is a difference between the legal framework of genocide as well as the sociological one. Just like Gaza currently, Sarajevo was under siege for 4 years. We were cut off from the rest of the world, from water, from aid, food, electricity, everything. We were indiscriminately bombed on a daily basis. Some days, I think as many as 2,000 shells would be thrown from the Serbian side. Snipers were set up that directly targeted civilians. It was a horrifying time. At the same time, outside of Sarajevo, in places such as Visegrad, Prijedor, Srebrenica, massive campaigns of ethnic cleansing and genocide were occurring. These weren't just small things, these were massive campaigns, massive relocations and expulsions, just as we're seeing is happening in Palestine, in Gaza. There was concentration camps, there was massacres, there was rape camps. The Srebrenica genocide was declared an act of genocide under the ICTY. Ratko Mladic and Radovan Karadzic were convicted not just as war criminals, but as being guilty of genocide. However, several other municipalities and places were not convicted as genocides. They were convicted just as crimes against humanity, as war crimes. The reason why I mentioned this is it's incredibly important for us to contextualize the sociological aspect of genocide. And that really, when we're looking at the definition of genocide, it is the intent to destroy in whole or in part a group based on their ethnicity, religious identity, or any other identity or nationality or other identity markers. What is happening in Gaza currently for me, both as somebody who survived a genocide and both as somebody who has spent so much of my life talking about the Bosnian genocide as well as the Holocaust and making these connections, for me, it is really a textbook case of genocide. It is a crime against humanity. When you open your social media and you see the heads of governments calling for full extermination, saying that they're going to wipe Gaza off the planet, calling them human animals, as well as other horrible things, I think it's very clear that there is certainly an aspect of genocidal intent. Prior to the war in Bosnia even starting, Radovan Karadzic was on the phone with another leader within his party, and they were discussing the siege of Sarajevo. And Radovan Karadzic said, "There's 300,000 Muslims in Sarajevo. All of them will be dead." And the other leader said, "Good, kill all the Muslims." That was an intentional expression of genocide, right? Their goal was to exterminate the Bosniak or the Bosnian Muslim population in Sarajevo. And they did that again by cutting off the water, the electricity, the food, the indiscriminate bombing, all of those things, just as is currently happening in Gaza. Now, I also want to point out, I mentioned a dehumanizing language. And I know that what's happening in Gaza currently is horrific, but it's worth reminding everyone that this didn't just start last week. This has been going on for a really, really long time. And I mean, 70 years, over 70 years of occupation. But particularly, I would say in the past decade or two, there has been such a rampant use of openly dehumanizing language. And openly dehumanizing language is ultimately what does lead to genocide. We've seen that in the Holocaust. We've seen it in the case of the Bosnian genocide. We weren't bombed out of nowhere. Srebrenica did not happen out of nowhere. These were things that took time, that took years of planning. And most importantly, they took a lot of devotion from particularly senior ethno-nationalist leaders to convince people that we should be dehumanized, that we were animals, that we were just Islamists, that if they didn't get rid of us, we would kill them, that, you know, we're going to force all their daughters to wear hijabs because we're Muslim and they're not. So that sort of rhetoric is not uncommon when it comes to cases of genocide. I mean, it's obviously one of the most important stages when you really consider it. And to hear the openly dehumanizing language spoken with so much fervor in the media, from government leaders, from regular people too, is horrifying. And it all leads us to where we're at right now, which is the fact that what is happening in Gaza is a genocide. I was only a child when the Bosnian War and genocide started. So to say that I remember every single day, I don't. But I remember enough. I remember enough of the bombs. I remember enough of the hunger. I remember enough of the snipers and the attacks and the terrors. It's really worth remembering that at least half of the population in Gaza are children. Children just like me, who are just trying to live their lives and instead are being met with violence, with bombings, with horrors at such a horrific scale. And that to me is terrifying. We are actively watching as genocide plays out on our phones and our TV screens. We are watching as people cheer on the genocide of a group of people. And I know that the excuse from some is going to be that this is all the fault of Hamas, and that they're not targeting Palestinian people, they're actually targeting Hamas. But that couldn't be further from the truth. This is just a classic case of a scapegoat that is easily used in order for them to commit the levels of crimes that they're committing right now. They are targeting innocent people, they're targeting civilians, and they're enacting collective punishment against people. I understand that, and I want to make it clear as well, that Bosnia and Palestine are not identical cases, because there is no such a thing as an identical case of genocide or war, no matter who it is. But there are enough similarities. For me, the alarming similarities is really the dehumanizing language and the almost proud proclamations of genocidal intent. And I think people really need to take a moment and pause and try to remember that just 30 years ago, the Bosnian genocide was happening, which means just 30 years ago, on our TV screens, or on the TV screens, at least of those in the West, there was similar rhetoric being spread. There was similar people who blamed Bosnians for defending themselves. There was people who didn't think that they needed to do anything, that they needed to speak out, that it did not matter at the end of the day, or that it was just happening to somebody far away. But I was not somebody that was far away that it was happening to. And the people in Palestine are now that somebody that it's happening to. These are real people with real lives who are being indiscriminately bombed, who are being cut off from medical aid, from electricity, from water, from food. I mean, starvation has already started to occur. There's massive reports of people running out of water, the little food provisions that they were left with. It is horror. And I cannot look at it and say that it is anything other than genocide. And I know that there will be some who will make qualms about that, who will criticize me for that, and that is fine. Obviously, there is an aspect here of various other crimes against humanity. There is an aspect of ethnic cleansing, of forcible expulsions, which is what Israel is currently attempting to do. But they're not just attempting to forcibly displace Palestinians. They are doing that and indiscriminately bombing them while cutting off them from the rest of the world and anything that may aid them. And obviously, as somebody who survived Bosnian genocide, I feel very passionately about this. And as I mentioned, I was a child, and that period of my life was so impactful that I ended up obviously dedicating the rest of my life to educating about the horrors of the Bosnian genocide and to educating about what dehumanization leads to. Even today, currently in Bosnia, we have an issue of ethno-nationalism. We have an issue of genocide denialism. We have an ethnically split country. So for me, genocide is a process that continues. It does not matter whether it's one person killed or 100 or 100,000. What matters is the intent behind it. Whether only 30 people could have been killed in the Holocaust, but it still would have been a genocide, because that's how genocide functions. The intent has to be there. The intent to destroy, the intent to destroy in whole or in part, by not just killing, but also making the situation and their circumstances so horrific that they cannot survive. Apologies. Again, the case of the Bosnian genocide and Palestine are different in many ways. Bosnia was not under occupation for 75 years, but we were under siege for 4 years by an aggressor. There was indiscriminate killing. There was massacres. Over 8,000 people were murdered in just one small town. Srebrenica is a very, very small town. And over 8,000 people were killed there in a very, very short span of time. I think what is terrifying for me in this moment is the fact that I am seeing a repeat of the same sort of actions that happened in Bosnia. Are they at the same level? No. Are they exactly the same? No. But they're similar enough that I feel compelled to speak out about this. The professor earlier mentioned that part of Holocaust education is never again. And unfortunately, after the Holocaust, Bosnia happened, and then we said never again. And then Rwanda happened, and we said never again. And so many other genocides have happened, and we keep saying never again, and we keep staying quiet while they happen, only to then turn around and proclaim loudly, never again. Well, never again is now. And I think that all of us have a responsibility to speak out, to put pressure on our collective political representatives and governments in any way that we can, and to take a stand and to stand with the Palestinian people. And once again, my solidarity with the Palestinians, both at home and the diaspora, And my deepest condolences to everybody who has lost somebody. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Arnessa. Thank you for your courage and your resilience, your example, your emphasis that never again means right now. Thank you also for highlighting, even though you indicated you were not a legal scholar, for highlighting that genocide is not merely about the numbers and how many lost, but the Genocide Convention criminalizes genocidal intent, which is unmistakable in this moment. And for more on that, the legal context from a legal scholar, we have Maha Abdullah, who I initially misidentified in her affiliation. I want to correct that. She is a graduate teaching assistant, PhD researcher at the University of Antwerp. Welcome, Maha, and thank you.
Thank you, Noura, and hello to everyone. And thank you very much, Arnessa, for your powerful testimony. As it was already mentioned, since last Saturday, we have seen an increase in public shameless statements from Israeli officials indicating genocidal intent, as well as potential genocidal acts, including massacres, large-scale deliberate destruction, forced displacement, and forcible transfer of Palestinians, as Israel relentlessly and mercilessly attacks yet once again over 2 million people who have been held captive in an open-air prison for 17 years. By now, we've all heard or read the many statements made by the Israeli decision makers that explicitly dehumanize Palestinians by describing them human animals and call for the destruction of Palestinians, especially in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli public seems to be on board too. One Israeli parliament has recently explicitly demanded the government to carry out another Nakba against Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere, one that will overshadow the Nakba of 1948, according to his demand. In the media, an Israeli journalist incites to turn Gaza into a slaughterhouse. Meanwhile, banners have been placed on Israeli roads with slogans calling for the massacre, for the mass destruction of Gaza, and for zero residents in Gaza. The examples of such chilling incitement rhetoric are one too many. Indeed, history should have taught us better by now, as the previous speakers have mentioned. Unfortunately, though, and shockingly, such calls have echoed in the United States and in Europe, where some representatives publicly supported the extensive destruction of Gaza without any regard for human life, dignity, and the rules of war or international law. However, as Arnessa alluded to, it is also important to remind that last week is by no means the starting point of practices and policies that have long sought to dehumanize, forcibly remove, and eliminate the Palestinian, wherever they may be. It will certainly not end there either, should impunity persist. About 9 months ago, Israeli Minister of Finance and Defense publicly called to wipe out the entire village of Hawara in Nablus, while Israeli settlers under the protection of Israeli forces carry out pogroms against Palestinian communities and towns across the West Bank, creating coercive environments, forcing their displacement and transfer. And in fact, since its inception and even prior, Israel, as a settler colonial militarized regime represented by its political, military, and religious figures, has made sure to stereotype and depict the Palestinian as barbaric and violent in its internal and external discourse, including through the media, textbooks, and others, but also as primitive, backward, criminal, terrorist, and vile, among other degrading terms. Zionism has waged a genocidal warfare against the Palestinian people the moment it claimed that Palestine is empty, and the moment that it claimed that there is a land without a people for a people without a land, denying the existence of an entire people and undermining its collective social, economic, political, and cultural history, ties, and rights. As the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in the occupied Palestinian territory put it in her first report to the UN General Assembly last year, it is the logic of elimination that drives Israel's settler colonial project in Palestine, and for the purpose of eliminating all traces and expression of Palestinian existence. The culmination of this over the decades has been the establishing of a Zionist Israeli Jewish supremacy, institutional discrimination, racism, and domination over the Palestinian people, who have been oppressed, deliberately fragmented, and severed from exercising the right to self-determination. Palestinians have been for decades warning against the system of apartheid. This very same regime of supremacy and structural violence embedded in the Zionist ideology and the State of Israel is what justifies the annihilation process of the Palestinian people, both in the physical and non-physical sense, from Gaza to Jerusalem to the Naqab through different tactics over the years. Discrimination, persecution, segregation, apartheid, forcible transfer, and dehumanization are all prominent features and prerequisites of genocide. They form the foundation upon which Israel has for decades carried out the dispossession and large-scale killing, targeting, and physical harm of the Palestinian people. And as debates continue about whether the claim of genocide is legally or factually correct, there are clear warnings and symptoms emanating in the current vicious reality on the ground, as was discussed already, including in the total besiegement imposed, the cutoff of water, electricity, medicine, and internet in Gaza, all essential for human survival, as well as the publicly intended large-scale destruction of Gaza and its people under the guise of self-defense. It is therefore incumbent upon all relevant stakeholders of the international community to immediately intervene and to take immediate measures to prevent genocide in line with the relevant duties under the Genocide Convention and other pertinent instruments of international law, and to put an end to the ongoing grave breaches, war crimes, and crimes against humanity against the Palestinian people once and for all. States must refrain from assisting such unlawful acts and cooperate to bring them to an end. Yeah.
Maha,
Mhm.
I apologize. The interpreters are asking for you to slow down. You are so wonderful and passionate, but the interpreters are not keeping up with you. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So, as I was saying, states must refrain from assisting such unlawful acts and cooperate to bring them to an end, as opposed to celebrate and cheer on those. Third states also have a duty to ensure that Israel refrains from further incitement to genocide and from perpetrating acts that are prohibited under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention. States must also act in accordance with Article 8 of the Genocide Convention and call upon the competent United Nations organs, namely the General Assembly and the Security Council, as well as the UN Office on the Genocide Prevention, to take the appropriate action to prevent genocide. The role of the UN General Assembly is particularly important in this instant, also considering the veto power dynamic at the Security Council, as well as the General Assembly's 1982 resolution that condemned the Sabra and Shatila massacres as an act of genocide. And by virtue of the Genocide Convention, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, does exercise jurisdiction. States party to the Genocide Convention could bring a case before the court, such as with the ongoing proceedings in the Gambia versus Myanmar and Ukraine versus Russia. And here it's important to note that the State of Palestine is party to the Genocide Convention since 2014. And in accordance with Article 9 of the Genocide Convention and considering Israeli statements and acts, particularly since the 7th of October of this year, the State of Palestine may trigger proceedings before the ICJ in relation to the prevention of genocide. As for the International Criminal Court, and in light of ongoing proceedings in the situation in Palestine at the ICC, and with genocide falling within the court's jurisdiction according to the Rome Statute, the Office of the Prosecutor must not shy away from investigating individual criminal liability in this respect. That is, of course, if he ever takes the unquestionably delayed investigation on the situation in Palestine to the next step. There is no lack of information or knowledge about what has been going on in Palestine for the past 100 years, all the violations and the international crimes being perpetrated. What there is a lack of political will, selectivity, and double standards on part of the international powers in how they act or do not act in this case, to respect and protect human rights, international law, and accountability. This signals danger not only to the Palestinian people, their rights and existence, but also to the credibility and effectiveness of international law and order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maha. I apologize for interrupting you as I did. We learned a tremendous amount from you. And I hope, in fact, that you will be able to publish what you wrote so that it remains on the record. I'm going to ask our esteemed panelists, Raz and Arnessa and Maha, to turn on their cameras for this Q&A segment. I'm sad that we cannot welcome Basil Surani, who provided us testimony from the ground. As I mentioned at the top of this webinar, we actually are having a lot of trouble keeping in touch with our colleagues and friends in Gaza and not sure about their safety at this moment, but we pray for their safety. We are fighting for their safety. So if you have a question, please send that to the chat. This is moderated. I will be asking the questions to the speakers that you send them to. I'll go one by one. And let me begin with a question for Maha, actually. Maha, do you feel there is any likelihood of Israeli officials and Israeli army personnel being held accountable for these statements and these attacks? Israel is unlikely to court-martial its own soldiers. So will the ICC step up and actually play a role here? Secondly, and related to this, would supplying arms, as the US is doing, be a contributory charge under international law?
Thank you for the question. No, I really don't believe that any Israeli official or military leader or personnel will be held accountable for any of the statements or actions that they have made. And I don't say that because I'm emotional or irrational. I say that because this is what has been proven over the past 7 or 8 decades to date. And unfortunately, Israel and other associated actors in Israel, whether as governmental or military representatives, they've enjoyed a wide range of impunity and unconditional impunity from impunity and protection from the international community for all the violations and atrocities they have been committing against the Palestinian people. We've seen investigation processes and proceedings being delayed and stalled, whether it be at the International Criminal Court or whether it be it in the UN bodies throughout the different mechanisms and so on. So as I mentioned towards the end of my intervention, there is a clear bias, a clear selectivity and double standards in how international community, especially the Western part of the international community, has decided to use and utilize and apply international law to the question of Palestine and the Palestinian people. And that doesn't help in bringing justice. It doesn't help in realizing Palestinians' fundamental rights, and therefore it will certainly not help in creating the peace that everyone is seeking. And as for the role of arms and arms companies, this is a particularly important moment to be calling on these entities and companies and different relevant actors to stop the trade in arms with Israel and to call on states to suspend and impose military embargoes as well.
Thank you, Maha, and if I can use moderator's privilege just to add to the legal dimension of this and underscore what you said about the politicization of the ICC. I have received a tremendous amount of inquiry of how we can use the law in this moment. I want to just emphasize to the audience that we should not place any faith in the law and legal institutions at this moment. We should not place any faith in the law and the legal institutions at this moment. The prosecutor recently, Kamal Khan, has come out to say that he will be prosecuting and investigating Hamas in the precise moment where there is an ongoing genocide and calls very explicit genocidal intent. This is to remind us that since the ICC was established in 2004, that with the exception of Slobodan Milosevic, almost all of those who have been tried have been African heads of state, African and Arab heads of state. And so this is why several countries have pulled out of the Rome Statute, or threatened to rescind their signature from the Rome Statute of 1998. It is not to say that we can't use this and that there isn't a case to be made. We should be making the case, but that case happens amongst us. There are also avenues for the legal practitioners out there to use universal jurisdiction to serve individuals. And it's a reminder that this genocide convention does not only hold government leaders to account, but individuals to account, which distinguishes it from almost all other international treaties, certainly the prohibition on torture, which is only limited to those who act with the color of law. And so individuals, including, in my opinion, media, individuals who have fomented this genocidal intent should be aware that they are also at risk of such prosecution. So I'll turn over now to Raz. If you can tell us, there is a question. Do you feel that the genocidal intent is limited to the current lineup of Israeli government, or does it extend to different sectors of the political spectrum?
I think that it's the question of genocide in Palestine, which is a question that's been discussed in the last 15 years, debated. So in the history of Israeli state and mass violence against Palestinians since 1948, that's one thing. And of course, there's no consensus on that. There is, of course, consensus on war crimes, on crimes of aggression, on military occupation, on siege, on many other international criminal acts, but not on genocide until this current attack on Gaza. What we're seeing now in Israeli politics and society, really across the board, and culture, and as you said, Nora, media, and on social media. And again, if you follow anyone who follows Hebrew language sources now on media and social media, it's all over the place. Genocidal, explicit, unashamed genocidal language, calls for genocidal killings. It's very, very clear. So I do think that it cuts across currently a lot of the kind of otherwise political, ideological boundaries and lines in Israeli politics and society. I did want to add, if possible, just for a minute, about Galan's specific language about complete siege, which I think is very important for the discussion of genocide, as you framed it, Nora, among us, because the international legal framework is another thing. But I think that Galant took the 17-year siege of Israeli siege on Gaza, which was already illegal according to international humanitarian law, which is the longest, and this is so very important, the longest siege of its kind in modern history, right? And turned it into a complete siege. This in itself signals genocidal intent, and very, very clearly, especially because there's nowhere to go. There is no, we've just seen a 9-month siege on Nagorno-Karabakh, And we've all witnessed the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh in front of our eyes, right? And these people lost everything. They've lost their society, their lives, their culture, their homes, everything, but they had somewhere to flee into Armenia, right? Palestinians in Gaza have nowhere to flee, right? This is urgent, the issue of Israel's genocidal assault. And I do think that it cuts across a lot of the boundaries and lines in Israeli politics and society and culture today.
Thank you for that context, which is even the removal of that context is quite violent and deliberate. So thank you for that. Arnessa, if you'll bear with us before I pose a question to you, I want to welcome Huda Abu Dagga. Welcome, Huda, who is also providing us testimony, as I understand it, from the ground. Is that right?
Yes.
Bless you, Huda, and may you be protected. Huda is here with us, and so I want to ask her a question. First, I want to give you the floor to share with us as you will. But also there is a question about how is this particular onslaught different from the 51-day onslaught in 2014?
Thank you, Noura. I'll start by saying that I'm not actually in Gaza right now. My whole family is, though, so my extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents, everyone is in Gaza at this moment. We did try to contact 8 journalists actually before to come and answer these questions, but unfortunately, the minute we contact any of them, we lose contact and we genuinely don't know anything about them, not even their families anymore. So I'm here. Hopefully I can share with you some of what I hear from my family, from the minimal contact we're able to receive from them. I can start before answering the question by saying my family, my town is in the south of Gaza, eastern side, eastern south. The whole town was evacuated on the second or third day of the onslaught. So even the safe south, as they say, is not really safe. And even within the south, a lot of the areas are already evacuated. So my town is currently one of the ghost towns. And even when they go to it for to grab some clothes or whatever, they say that the situation is bad. They've everything is destroyed. The main definers of the town is destroyed. But at the end of the day, we say as long as the people are alive and well, till now, it's not a problem. We'll rebuild Gaza again. I think the best way to describe how this is worse than the 2014 onslaught, even though the 2014 was horrendous, it was one of the longest attacks on Gaza, lasted for 52 days. During that time as well, I think 2 or 3 weeks, and again, my family had to evacuate their areas as well. So we've kind of lived this before, but this time it's 10 times, a million times worse. From the first day, we've lost around 14 people from my extended family, 14 members of my family. From one family, only a 10-year-old or 11-year-old survived, and her uncle from that, family. As I said, they've all had to evacuate, and these evacuations, when they happened in 2014, they were for a much shorter period of time, and generally the targets or the attacks were more targeted towards maybe military structures, maybe they had some form of way to when they were targeting things. And this is what I hear from even testimonies from our team members who are on the ground there actually. So right now they're literally not even wiping out families, they're wiping up whole neighborhoods. And if you I don't know, I don't think many people know this, but in Gaza specifically, or even, for example, my town specifically, each neighborhood is for a family. So when you wipe out a neighborhood, you're wiping out a whole family. When you're making this neighborhood evacuate, you're making the whole family leave. My family is literally all over the place right now. They're not in one place. When they were evacuating, a lot of them were hesitating to evacuate because they genuinely didn't know where to go. Because as I said, the whole family would be located in one area. So if you're issuing orders of evacuating this area, you're putting a whole family in a place of displacement, unless they have friends or colleagues. And even when they do evacuate, they're not even safe. So it's insane. Like every day we hear accounts of, you know, bombings in this area where my family is, or some members of my family are evacuated. So really, this time it's the scale is it's being done on a much larger scale than 2014. The intent is clearly, or the way they're doing it is clearly to harm and kill as many people as possible. The way they just bomb houses full of people, and you have 44 members of a family, you know, dying and in between deaths and injuries, or like right now 47 families are wiped up from the civil registry, which is, and we're not talking about 4 people, we're talking about families of 10, 15 members. So the situation on the ground is horrifying. Another thing that is also adding to the struggle is the fact that, you know, they're hearing news that, you know, you're going to be evacuated to Egypt. That in of itself is driving them insane. Like when we speak, like I've never seen them in such a state of, they're like every single time they have some form of hope. This time they're genuinely, they don't know what's going to happen. They call us, and the phone call would be, the very short phone call, by the way, would be just them crying on the phone and us crying back, not knowing what to say to them. Like they message me, Huda, send us news. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I genuinely don't know what to tell you about what's happening, because, you know, more bombings, more people are dying. You might be evacuated to Egypt. We all don't know, deported to Egypt. It's driving everyone insane. It's aside from all the blockages of the food, like I have family members who have been living off tea and biscuits, and now they can't even have tea because the gas finished in the house they've evacuated to. I have another branch of my family who have rented a house far away from our area, and they're literally living off the food that comes from the families around every 2 days. And here I'm not talking about 1 or 2 people. I'm talking about a family of 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 people. So it is, forgive me for not being, maybe I might be sounding all over the place, but it's not normal what they're going through. Like right now we think of the 2014 aggression, the 2012 aggression, the 2008 aggression as normal aggressions compared to this one. Like, yeah, we'd all rather go back to the 2014 aggression compared to what we're going through right now, or what they are going through right now on the ground. So yeah, I honestly don't know what more I can say to explain. You know, food was never an issue before for them. In Gaza, there's always aid coming in. There's always people helping each other with food. But this time, even food is becoming a hurdle. It's becoming an issue. The most basic need is becoming something that is adding to their struggle. Let's not talk about water, electricity. Maybe they're used to life without electricity, but food is one of the things that is actually shocking to see them actually struggling for. So it's insane in every single aspect. This has never happened before. Usually, again, this mass destruction of full neighborhoods doesn't usually happen on such a scale. It's for example, a Rimal neighborhood, that's like the most, I don't know, elegant, the prettiest neighborhood in Gaza, one of the most populated as well. All the main universities, main shops, malls. It's like the place where people, the main park is there where people go to enjoy time, or I don't. It's in ruins right now, and to see that happening to a neighbor, like again, they're deleting main components of the city. Even now, they're bombing in Khan Yunis, for example, one of the cities of the south. Where are they bombing? They're bombing the central area, the main I'm losing my words, but the main monuments of each area, the things that when you see this area, you recognize it. Like even my town, when we saw videos of it, I couldn't recognize my own town. I was looking until I saw a monument that had the name of my town. I realized, oh my God, this is my town. So they're literally erasing our existence. It's not even just, massacres. They're erasing any identity of Palestinians. Everything that defines the areas are being deleted. So it's an insane account of destruction and massacres that is happening on the ground right now, and we genuinely don't know what's going to happen. We don't know if we're ever going to see Gaza again, and I think that in of itself is maybe one of the most difficult things to have to process and deal with, to think that your existence is going to be deleted from this area. This area is not going to belong to you anymore, or you're not going to have a right to go visit it or see it or live in your home or in your land. Yeah, I think, this is all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But this is, I guess, the briefest I could talk about what's going on. Like, I can genuinely go on for days talking about what's happening, but I'll leave the floor to any questions, or if anyone has any questions in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Huda. One of it takes a tremendous amount of courage and also a tremendous amount of grounding to be able to share these horrors in these moments. And so really just want to thank you for sharing with us. And I want to emphasize that as someone concerned with, human rights remedy, oftentimes we don't see remedy. Right? There's, people often ask, international law isn't really real because you can't punish violations and you can't, direct state behavior. But people fight in this realm nonetheless, just to be able to give survivors the opportunity to speak. And you are speaking, and very loudly. It is agency that belongs to you and to us to do this. And so with that, we only have 6 minutes left. So what I'm going to do in this moment is to ask all the remaining questions at once and to give our speakers the floor. I'll begin with Arnessa. This question is to you, and then let me ask the other questions before you answer it, please. But Arnessa, the question that we have to you: was the genocidal intent in Bosnia something that appeared before the war, or something that appeared that was being built up over the years as an attempt to actually rid of Bosniaks? Do you feel the process is similar to the situation to Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere? To Maha, I want to ask you, what are the practical steps that become available, even if we prove unequivocally that genocide is happening in Gaza? Which audience do we need to convince? Because as you mentioned, Sabra and Shatila is recognized as a genocide, but literally nothing has come of that. Although I'll let you push back a little bit on the nothing in terms of the Kahan Commission and what was established. Raz, I'll ask you a question. And so one of the hardest things right now is that because of this through line and this dehistoricization and depoliticization that wants to connect Palestinian use of armed force to Nazi atrocities, that the question of genocide is being blurred. And what the media and many Zionists are trying to emphasize is that what Palestinian use of armed force is actually targeted at all Jews and genocidal. And this is really, really harmful. And I think the discourse that we're trying to cut through, can you address that and how then we can make this case more plainly? We only have a few minutes left, so if each of you can limit your comments, and Huda, if you'd like to add anything at the very end, to about a minute to a minute and a half. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. As far as whether the intent of genocide was sudden or whether it had taken years to get there, it was not sudden. It was slowly planned and slowly unveiled. Obviously, the genocide in Bosnia came as a result of the dissolution of Yugoslavia and all the respective republics declaring independence, such as Bosnia. But Bosnia was not the first country that was attacked. There was attempts by Serbia to attack. I believe it was Slovenia first, then Croatia, then Bosnia. Up until they actually attacked, they were smuggling weapons into the country. They were instigating fervor. They were spreading propaganda. So the intent behind the destruction was absolutely there prior to the beginning of the genocide, actually. And yes, I do see similarities here when it comes to Gaza. You know, as I've said, they're not the same in a lot of ways. There's vast differences between Palestine and Bosnia. Obviously, we're talking about a 75-year-long occupation, lots of different aggressions throughout the years, a very pathetic attempt at any sort of international justice for current or past atrocities. But there's enough similarities, particularly in the way that politicians in Israel and the leadership is talking about Gazans. Not just this time, in the past. I feel like this has been also building, and they just found the right excuse in this case to really amp up, you know, their destruction of Palestinians.
Thank you, Arnessa. Maha?
Thanks, Noura. I think it's a difficult question with maybe a bit of contradictions in how I would answer it. As most Palestinians, sure, there's a lot of frustrations with international law and the mechanisms, but also in international law from its colonial roots to the implementation and applicability today through its different bodies. But at the same time, as Palestinians, I don't think we should depart from that. And I don't think we should leave that space empty and that battle open for others to take over and manipulate further even. And sure, the numerous UN resolutions have failed the Palestinian people, whether they're positive or negative in their context, but they're important. They're important for the history, for accountability, and because systems, I mean, are run by people and people change. And if for decades we've had the wrong people in place, maybe one day I'm sure that I'm confident that it's changing, and we'll have people who are genuinely concerned with justice and accountability. So which audience to go to? Definitely the United Nations General Assembly. Again, as you mentioned and I mentioned, there was a recognition of massacres against Palestinians in Sabra and Shatila as genocide in the past. Why not today? The scale and intensity of the massacres and the destruction that's happening in Gaza today, and that has happened over the years and in different wide-scale, large-scale military offensives, may fall within the same category. We have an ongoing commission of inquiry at the United Nations that should also be taking the lead and presenting a role model, let's say, to other UN bodies and mechanisms in investigating and warning against symptoms of genocide against Palestinians. We have also individual states who have ratified the Genocide Convention and who should be actively engaging with and seeking their action in this regard, whether be it in publishing statements or communications with Israel and other relevant actors with warning against genocide and to prevent genocide, or whether it be through their domestic jurisdictions to activate and trigger cases against individuals from the Israeli government or military that are inciting on genocide. This is not very difficult to do, especially when we're looking at the numerous dual citizens that serve in the Israeli military, that serve in the Israeli government, whether in Europe or in the United States or elsewhere. And of course, our larger audience.
I'm going to cut you off. I apologize, but we're over time and I wanted to give Raz an opportunity and perhaps Hada an opportunity to close. Thank you. We'll be following up for sure.
I do just want to, emphasize what you said, Maha, that really, may we see the day soon that Israeli politicians and army officers, and in some cases journalists and other, will face accountability for what we're seeing now in front of our eyes very clearly. And I do think I join your hope, that these institutes can change because people can change. And as I indicated before, I think we are seeing some sort of shift these days. With this, just in response to what you asked me, I think there's one of the root problems here. This goes from the root problems, the conflation of a people, Jews, and a state, Israel, a state that 1/5 of its citizens are Palestinians and not Jews, and where, of course, many Jews do not identify with Israel. Many Jews were and are anti-Zionist. Many Jews were and are non-Zionist. They are Americans, or they're British, or they're whoever they are. They have no interest in Israel. They don't want any this way or the other. They're not anti or pro. They're non-Zionist. They're Jews. So this conflation is very, very dangerous. Actually, it's also wrong. The people who were targeted and killed in the Hamas attack were Israeli citizens. That's how we need to refer to them first and foremost, right? Israeli citizens. And we need to remember that what we're talking about here is not this decontextualized targeting of Jews, certainly not in the way that we saw Jews targeted in this long history of mass violence against Jews. But what we're seeing here is a powerful state, a nuclear power with one of the most significant armies in the world, with the support of all the Western powers. So we need to really cut this distorted picture of Jews facing Nazis, right? This kind of propaganda image, and speak the truth of what's going on around here. And really, Ma, thank you very much. I share your commitment to bringing these people to trial and to accountability one day.
Thank you, Raz. Hada, if you have last words in less than a minute.
Yes, of course. I'm just gonna say one thing. I'm not gonna repeat any statistics, numbers, facts that are on the ground. I think we all are well aware of them. I think I'm gonna try to echo the sounds from the ground and what I hear from the people there. All they want right now is for this escalation to stop, for this bombing to stop. They don't ask anything from the world, no humanitarian aid, nothing. All they want is for the bombing to stop, for this destruction to stop, for this death to stop. They want to go back to their homes. They want to rise from under the ashes and build Gaza. They don't need anything other than for this bombing to stop. And I feel like this is the best thing I could end with from the ground. Just pray for them, and they ask us and they ask the world, do something to stop this. And I hope we can find some way to stop this.
Thank you, Hada. We are praying for them and we are fighting for them. And we are fighting for ourselves. This is a catastrophe to all of humanity. It is a massive failure for those who continuously tell me they won't speak, afraid about their jobs and livelihood. What is the value of these jobs and this livelihood in a world that has absolutely failed and betrayed its own humanity? So let us continue to fight for this immediate ceasefire and for justice and decolonization. Thank you to our esteemed speakers, to Professor Raz Sigal, to Arnisa Kastura, to Maha Abdullah, to Huda Abu Dagge, to Basil Surani, to the organizers of this event. May you have the power and the strength to continue. Thank you. And the interpreters, I apologize, the interpreters, Melek and Reem. Thank you so much to you. We cannot see you, but we cannot do this without you. Shukran.